The cowboy had long ago stopped counting the years, not because he had forgotten how, but because the numbers no longer felt attached to him. Seasons passed in a rhythm measured by dust and wind, by the creak of the porch board, and the way the sun slid behind the ridge at dusk. His cabin stood alone where the land thinned into silence, a low, weathered structure of timber and stone that had learned to endure without complaint. He had chosen the place for its distance from towns that asked questions, from neighbors who remembered who he used to be, from memories that grew louder the closer he got to other people. Out here the world spoke softly, and he had learned to answer it with work. That evening settled like many others. He stacked the last of the cut wood near the door, brushed the grit from his hands, and lit the fire as the sky deepened from brass to violet. The heat rolled back into the room, steady and familiar. He poured water into the kettle, listening to it whisper as it warmed, and leaned his weight against the table, letting the ache in his knees find its place. Loneliness had a shape by then. It was the space between sounds, the way the room held its breath when he sat down. He didn't resent it. He had made peace with the idea that some lives narrowed over time, becoming truer for it. The knock came just as the kettle began to sing. 3 soft raps, evenly spaced, like someone careful not to offend the quiet. He frowned, unsure at first whether he'd imagined it. People didn't come out here by accident. He set the kettle down and listened. The wind moved along the eaves, carrying the scent of sage. Then the knock came again, patient, unmistakable. He crossed the room with the caution that habit had taught him, one hand resting near the doorframe as if the wood itself could lend him steadiness. When he opened the door, the light from the fire spilled out across the dirt, and in it stood 4 women, their silhouettes cut clean against the last pale band of sky. They were Apache. He knew that much at a glance, not from clothing alone, but from the way they stood. Feet planted as if they belonged exactly where they were. Dust clung to their hems and hair, the kind earned by miles walked under a hard sun. Their eyes met his without challenge, without apology. The eldest stepped forward half a pace, not invading his space, simply making herself the voice. Her hair was streaked with gray and braided neatly down her back. "Good evening," she said, and the words carried the weight of courtesy, not fear. "We are traveling between places. Night has come faster than we expected." He studied them, taking in the details the way he always did, hands empty, shoulders relaxed, breath steady. He felt the old instinct rise, the one that measured risk. But it found little to feed on. "It's a rough stretch to be caught on," he said at last, his voice unused to company. "Nearest town's a long walk from here." "We know," she replied. "That is why we ask." She didn't embellish, didn't plead. "One night of shelter, warmth, we will be gone at first light. No trouble." The words hung between them, simple and heavy. The desert darkened and the temperature began its swift descent. He could have said no. The door could have closed, and the night would have swallowed them the way it swallowed everything else. He felt the familiar pull of caution, the argument for keeping things as they were. But alongside it came something else, older and quieter, a recognition that the land itself had taught him better than to turn away those who came in honest need. He stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said, surprising himself with how easily the words came. "It's not much, but it's dry." They entered one by one, each nodding as they passed him, their presence changing the air without a sound. The cabin seemed to notice them, the fire crackling as if pleased to have more faces to warm. One woman set down a small bundle near the wall, careful not to block the way. Another glanced at the ceiling beams, the shelves lined with jars and tools, absorbing the place with quiet respect. No one touched anything without asking. No one spoke more than necessary. He poured water into cups, hands steady despite the unfamiliar feeling in his chest. The eldest accepted the cup with both hands and murmured thanks. The others followed suit, forming a loose circle around the hearth. For a moment, no one spoke at all. The silence felt different now, not empty, but held, as if waiting its turn. "You live alone," one of the women observed gently, not as a question, but as a fact noticed. He nodded. "A long time." She didn't ask why. None of them did. Instead, another woman reached into her bundle and produced a small tin, opening it to reveal dried leaves and roots. She asked permission with a look, and when he nodded again, she added a pinch to the kettle. The scent that rose was unfamiliar but comforting, green and sharp, cutting through the smoke. They sat and drank, the warmth easing the stiffness from their hands. The eldest spoke then. telling him the names of the mountains they had crossed, the weather they had outrun. She spoke of routes remembered by stars, of how the land could be generous if you listened and cruel if you didn't. He listened, surprised by how naturally he settled into the role, how his own words stayed tucked away without effort. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken in his presence without expecting something from him in return. Outside, the wind found its voice, but inside the cabin, the fire held. Shadows moved along the walls, no longer solitary. He noticed how the room felt smaller and larger at once, filled but not crowded. The thought unsettled him, and yet he didn't push it away. When the kettle emptied and the cups were set aside, the eldest rose. "We are grateful," she said simply. "We will not forget this kindness." He waved a hand, embarrassed by the weight. She gave it. "It's just a roof for the night." She met his eyes, a faint smile touching her mouth. Sometimes that is everything. As they settled in, close to the fire, careful of each other's space, the cowboy took his chair by the door, an old habit he didn't bother to explain. The night pressed close to the windows, but it did not feel so vast anymore. For the first time in years, the cabin held more than one shadow, and he wondered, not for the last time, what it meant to open a door and let the world answer back. The fire burned lower as the night stretched on, settling into a steady glow that pulsed like a living thing. The cowboy added a log without being asked, the movement instinctive, and sparks climbed briefly before disappearing into the dark of the chimney. Outside, the wind traced slow circles around the cabin, testing the walls, but inside there was a sense of shelter that went beyond timber and stone. The women sat close enough to share the heat, yet far enough to honor space. Their silhouettes relaxed, as if the night itself had given them permission to rest. Time loosened. The hours no longer marched forward but drifted, marked by small sounds, the crack of sap in the firewood, the soft clink of a cup being set aside, the sigh of breath released after a long day carried on the shoulders. One of the women hummed quietly, a tune without words, low and steady. It wasn't meant to entertain, it was meant to remember. The sound wove itself into the room, and the cowboy felt something uncoil in his chest, a tension he hadn't realized he still carried. They spoke then, not all at once and not in long speeches. Stories emerged the way water does from stone, slowly with patience. One woman talked about a river she had known as a girl, how it changed course after a flood and never returned to where it had been. Another spoke of a winter journey that had taught her the difference between endurance and stubbornness. Their words weren't confessions. They were offerings set down gently with no demand that he respond in kind. He listened, leaning back in his chair, boots planted, hands wrapped around the warmth of his cup. Listening had once been a skill he'd prized, back when people still came to him with problems that needed fixing. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped believing he was needed for that. Now in the firelight, he realized the listening itself had never lost its worth. Eventually, one of them turned the attention toward him without pressing. "You chose this place," she said, her tone neither curious nor judgmental. Most would not. He considered the answer longer than he expected to. "The land doesn't pretend," he said finally. "It gives you what it gives you. I found I could live with that." The eldest nodded as if he had confirmed something she already suspected. "Many people mistake quiet for emptiness," she said. "They are not the same." The words settled deep. He stared into the fire, seeing not just flame but the years layered behind it, the choices made, the roads not taken, the faces that had faded without fully disappearing. He did not share those details. He didn't need to. The understanding was already there, passed between them without effort. As the night wore on, sleep claimed them in gentle turns. One woman leaned against the wall, eyes closing as naturally as a curtain falling. Another stretched out near the hearth, careful to keep her blanket clear of sparks. The eldest remained awake the longest, her gaze thoughtful, as if she were keeping watch over more than the room. The cowboy felt no need to guard the door. For once, vigilance loosened its grip. When he did sleep, it came without struggle. No sharp dreams, no sudden waking, just a deep, untroubled rest that surprised him with its ease. He woke to the faint gray of pre-dawn, the fire reduced to embers, the cabin wrapped in that brief, sacred quiet that comes before birds remember themselves. For a moment he lay still, unsure of where he was. Then he saw them stirring softly, and the memory returned, not as disruption but as warmth. He rose quietly and set about making coffee, the familiar ritual grounding him. The smell filled the cabin, rich and comforting. One by one, the women woke, offering small smiles, nods of greeting that carried more meaning than words. There was no rush, no sense of departure yet. Dawn was patient. They shared the coffee in silence, watching light creep across the floorboards. Outside, the desert revealed itself again, unchanged and yet entirely new. The eldest stood and adjusted her shawl, then turned to him. "We will go now," she said. "The day waits." He nodded, a strange tightness forming at the back of his throat. He hadn't expected the leaving to feel like anything at all. "The trail south stays firm for a while," he offered. "If you keep the ridge on your left, you'll avoid the wash." She smiled, appreciative. "We will remember." At the door, she paused. "You gave us more than a roof," she said. "You gave us a night without fear. That matters." He wanted to dismiss it, to shrug it off as coincidence or duty, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he simply said, "Safe travels." They stepped out into the morning, their figures growing smaller against the widening light. He watched until they were part of the land again, indistinguishable from the paths they walked. When the last trace of them vanished, he remained in the doorway, the cabin behind him and the open world ahead. Inside, the room felt different, not emptier, but changed, as if it had learned something new about itself. He closed the door slowly and turned back to the fire, stirring the embers to life. The day stretched before him, familiar yet subtly altered. He realized then that being alone forever had been a story he'd told himself, a boundary drawn for safety. One night had not erased his solitude, but it had reshaped it, showing him that connection did not have to be permanent to be profound. As the sun climbed, he set to his chores with a lighter step. The land was the same. He was the same. And yet something had shifted, a quiet certainty that the door, once opened, could be opened again.